Hi, my name is Dale Obrochta, and today I am interviewing Matthew Fox. Matthew Fox is a distinguished Toastmaster and has been in many competitions as evaluator, has gotten to the finalist level of the district level, and has actually come out to the Orland Park Toastmasters and talked to us about evaluation. So today I'm going a little farther in our interview and ask Matt some more questions about evaluation. So Matt, thank you for being here, first of all.
My pleasure, Dale. I'm excited to share any humble knowledge I have about evaluations with the world at large.
Well, let's start off with a simple question. All right. How does good evaluation affect a speaker?
Good evaluation, in my opinion, makes or breaks a great presentation and really can drive someone's moral up or down based on the type of feedback that an evaluator gives. And to elaborate a bit on that, most new evaluators, especially if they're newer to speaking, end in either a whitewashing model where everything is amazing, it was the best speech they heard, and there's not really much you can improve upon. Or they go into a doom and gloom model where it might have been a good speech, but there's this long laundry list of things that you need to do on it. And you could probably take away as far as which one is going to help and which one may not help a speaker. However, the sweet spot between those two is actually taking things that you really enjoyed about the speech and things that if they were to give that speech again, they can improve upon. Based on what's in the manual, ideally, that's where you're going to come in the ideal. Because if you go too far one way and everything is great, they don't have room for improvement. If you go too far the other way, they're going to walk away thinking that they can never improve, and why are they even there? And that to me, especially the doom and gloom one, definitely goes against that reason that people want to come to Toastmasters.
Now, do you feel in evaluation process that some people give that laundry list just as too long of improvements, or do you think it's best to focus in on maybe something that's easy to correct in the speech, or is it better to pick out something that you feel is a little more difficult and challenging to correct? What is you consider a happy medium?
So I consider it based on the experience of the speaker themselves. For example, if someone's giving their icebreaker, and if you're not familiar with Toastmasters, that's the first speech that someone new to the program would give, the amount of feedback that I feel is appropriate is much different than if it's an experienced Toastmaster. For example, if I was evaluating you, Dale, I'd be a little tougher. I would try to point out the things that, granted, I think are going to give the most value, but I'm going to really try to focus on giving value back to you as a speaker so you can actually walk away thinking that you've got some actionable items to improve upon. The hope with the different types of evaluation based on speaker experience is that, yes, I like to give maybe 1 to 2 things that are easy to implement. For example, if they moved too much, which is a common occurrence, especially in smaller settings that Toastmasters are presenting in, random rooms and rec centers or a conference room, those are very confined spaces. So people, I've noticed, move a lot. The second piece would be more of a stretch goal. For example, you're at this level, and I think if you started doing XYZ, you could bring it up to the next level. And that, to me, is really important because then, even for the newer speakers, like an icebreaker, it gives them something to push a little bit towards. And the nice thing is, being a DTM myself, I've gone through those 10 speeches in the CC manual. I've gone through dozens of other speeches in the advanced manuals. And so I can try to pick and choose if someone needs to work on vocal variety and they're a beginner, or if someone needs to work on their message and they really need to work on what their main goal of that speech is for more of the advanced speakers.
Now that's an interesting intake because you're You're talking about the quality of the speaker with the evaluator. Now, in some clubs, you're going to have somebody who's doing evaluation possibly for the first time, maybe in the third, fourth time doing evaluation, and now they're asked to evaluate somebody who is an advanced speaker. This is
Yep.
somebody who has gone through their 10 speeches, 12 speeches. Can a person of that caliber still evaluate a, quote, expert speaker because they've done their CC or the competent communicator? Are they still qualified to do that?
They are. And that's a challenge I've seen many new evaluators and many clubs grapple with, is you may have a advanced member go up to speak, and there's no one in the club yet that is as advanced. For example, let's say at Orland Park, I know this isn't the case, but just humor me. I know you have your DTM, you're going up to give a speech, and no one else in the club has a DTM. No one's even gotten through the CC manual yet. Who can evaluate Dale? Well, in my opinion, anyone can. We've been listening to speeches and presentations, plays and rock concerts, and even teachers in school throughout life. And that gives us a wealth of experience to draw on. I feel like although Toastmasters has this easy-to-follow program, which can help anyone improve their public speaking skills, everyone is public speaking. And so you already have a sound that you're looking for, or some internal litmus test, if you will, that allows you to go out and say, well, you move too much for me. Or when you were speaking, your pitch or your rate was so fast that I couldn't keep up. Now, a newer evaluator may not use those terms, but they may be able to explain it in terms that work for them, just to say, Dale, you spoke so fast I couldn't even keep up. I was still stuck on point 1, and you were on point 15 already. There were so many points I didn't know where to go. And I know an expert speaker like you would never commit those things.
Oh,
but
it's interesting because you're pulling out something. I want to interrupt for a second. I don't think a lot of beginners actually think about what you were talking about, their personal life experience that they bring when they come into Toastmasters. That was very insightful information. I know myself, I speak fast sometimes, and hearing that probably from a beginner would be very, very useful for me, because I think a lot of people in the group have probably heard me speak before and may be used to that. So I could see that being very valuable information. Now, I want to follow up on this. What should a speaker look for in the evaluation? Because we talked briefly about what the evaluator needs to do, but what is the speaker looking for?
And that's something I feel like is actually a gap in Toastmasters. And it's a great question to bring up, because 9 times out of 10, a manual is really focused on what you want to be doing as a speaker. Occasionally, it's getting a little bit more into, well, ask your evaluator certain questions or talk to your evaluator beforehand. But I feel like that part is glossed over, especially for advanced speakers, and if they haven't seen some of the newer training materials that Toastmasters has produced. As speakers, we have a responsibility to our evaluator. It's to go up to them before our speech. Even if you're assigned an evaluator at the last minute, you can still set some type of expectation of what your crutches are as a speaker. You may have certain things that are a crutch word. You may have certain body movements that are crutch body movements. You may have a certain message that you're trying to get across, and you simply want them to write down what message they heard. And that's on top of whatever's in the manual. I think it's pretty easy for anyone to come off the street, even if they haven't been exposed to Toastmasters before, pick up a manual and actually figure out what the manual should be evaluating on. But I think that's just the beginning for a speaker. And with speakers, I think it helps to set expectations on how and what that person can evaluate on. For example, I was out in California in the greater LA area about a month ago, and I went to a Toastmasters improv meeting. Now, it was a Toastmasters club that brought in improv, but they did regular speeches. Now, it just so happened that evening they didn't have an evaluator for one of the speeches. So I stepped up, and I actually did what I hope most speakers would do, is when they hear a last-minute evaluator is assigned, I went to the speaker as his evaluator and said, Bob, what do you want me to focus on in your speech? Are there any crutches? Is there anything that you're trying to get across in this speech? Do you want me to just focus on the manual, or do you want me to use my experience as well? Because some people who are Toastmaster traditionalists, if you will, they may only want to go off of what's in the manual, or if it's a beginner Toastmaster club, they may focus completely on the manual, so that way newer Toastmasters and those who are still learning the game, if you will, it allows them to actually hear what a manual evaluation looks like. And to me, there's competition evaluations, there's advanced evaluations, there's manual evaluations. There's so many different types of evaluations that you can give.
I find that interesting because I know in our club, we have the guidelines, we have the manual, but we typically will always ask, is there something we should be looking for? Mm-hmm. And a quick personal story, I said that to one lady, I was at another club, and she kind of looked at me and went, have you ever done an evaluation before? I'm like, yes, I've done quite a few of them. And she's like, well, why you ask me what am I looking for? And I thought to myself, here's somebody who is probably just evaluating from a book, who's not doing what you've actually pointed out is a small gap, is actually asking that person, what do you feel are your weaknesses? Mm-hmm. And things that you're trying to overcome. Because I know in Toastmasters, everybody comes for a different reason. And I think you're pointing out something that maybe some clubs overlook, but beginners, that's a great takeaway for beginners again, is to ask the individual simply, what are you what are you trying to achieve? I think that's a very good point.
You don't need years of experience in Toastmasters or having gone through a Dale Carnegie speech class or anything other than just life experience to come in and be able to tell if someone's speaking too fast or if they're moving too much. Or if a speaker tells you to watch out for something, it's like the purple car, where if you're going out to buy a car and you find this really cool Nissan or Toyota that you've never seen before in this great color, and you start thinking about it, you leave the dealership that day, you'll suddenly start seeing that purple car everywhere.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, I never realized that before. I'd argue the same thing can happen in a speech. When you go up to someone and you find out what they want you to pay attention to, you're looking for that the entire time.
That's good. Now, you brought up a point. I'm just trying to think what it was here for a second. Mm-hmm. Now, the evaluation process, have you ever been in a situation where somebody's given you feedback and you just felt like it's coming from left field, like, no, my timing's perfect, and you've just kind of blown off the evaluation? Or do you actually look at it and, as a speaker, go, maybe they do have a point? Can you think back to a situation where that may have happened?
I can think back to several that, as both an evaluator and speaker, if I'm a speaker, I take all feedback with a grain of salt. If I'm an evaluator, I tell speakers, take all my feedback with a grain of salt. And it's that sense that under whatever conditions you're giving that speech or presentation in that moment, that's what the feedback is based on. Maybe you're trying to do NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, and there's a certain technique you're trying out. Well, if that didn't resonate well with the audience, and that was the feedback that I got, then I know right away that either I'm showing them the magic, I'm actually showing them what I was doing, and I wasn't smooth enough to actually pull it off, or maybe that it just didn't resonate well on that day. And it goes for a variety of situations. And this is a bit of a non sequitur, but I think there's a big gap with why we're speaking to begin with. And there's an opportunity as well for many Toastmasters to sit back and say, what am I really getting ready to give this speech for? Why am I really doing this presentation? Am I an entertainer like Dale? Am I a world champion like Prez and I want people to buy products? Am I a comedian like Jeff Stein? And I could go into countless other Toastmasters. Am I a professional speaker like Patricia Fripp? Each person has a different reason for getting up and speaking. And I think that's important for not only the evaluator, but for the audience to understand. Newer evaluators, it may be a little bit of a stretch or a struggle to know why a sales presentation would be different than a technical presentation. But definitely for the advanced evaluators out there, they should have a pretty good idea about the pitch, cadence, and props that you'd want to use in a sales presentation, how it's going to be a bit over the top, how it's going to be very engaging, versus a technical presentation where you might need to be very specific. So again, I was giving a contest-style evaluation where I'd be speaking to a big room of people, literally hundreds of people. I'd have to use big gestures. The feedback that I got back from my local Toastmaster meeting, my gestures were too big for that room. My stance, everything seemed like I was competing. Like, why did I have to give a contest-style evaluation when I was at a club meeting?
Right.
Well, they were right. They were right from the perspective of it was over the top. It was too much for that Toastmaster meeting. But it wasn't too much for my goals. It wasn't too much for what I was trying to achieve at that point, which was getting evaluation experience to be presentable at the next level. And I actually had another Toastmaster come up after the meeting and said, evaluation was great. Yes, it was too much for this small room in this meeting, but it would play very well at the next level.
That's interesting because we're kind of going back to the same point, which is really getting the input from the speaker on why they're doing it, and then address why they're doing it. You could now evaluate on how successful they will be if you could imagine that venue that they're in, possibly not the actual club environment.
Exactly. The club environment's a padded room, if you will. It's very safe. It's very encouraging. It's great for you to build up your confidence, for you to get comfortable speaking. But I always take anything I'm doing in a Toastmaster meeting in a bit of a bubble. And I've actually, again, just as an aside, I've gone out to other groups to test out material and to see how good my skills actually compared to professionals or in the real world.
Right.
Because we do get into this very protective where, you have to be very careful about the type of feedback you give. You have to be very careful about what you say and what you do in a Toastmaster meeting, which is no knock on a Toastmaster meeting. I love the meetings. I support them. I am an advocate for Toastmasters. However, at the heart of things, I want people to improve, even to the extent of some of the different evaluations I've done over time. And feel free to cut me off here if I'm going too far off the rails.
No, this is interesting. Keep going.
I've experimented with different styles of feedback. So I've erred on that side of whitewashing and doom and gloom. I've tried to find that sweet spot. I've also worked to give more feedback to a speaker after those 2 to 3 minutes are up. Yes, others will argue that you can give everything you need in 2 to 3 minutes for that next speech to be better. But I think, again, there's another opportunity for evaluators to actually talk to speakers after the evaluation is done. Think of how much time you put into developing a speech or a presentation that isn't a stoplight speech where you're literally writing it on the way to the meeting.
Right.
Those ones where you're working on a world championship speech, where you're working on a contest speech, where you're working on something for work that needs to play well to a professional audience, I'm willing to bet you've put a half an hour, maybe more into preparation, into getting ready for that speech. Well, in 2 to 3 minutes, that really doesn't do it justice to give anyone the type of feedback to really excel, to really push themselves as much as they can achieve with Toastmasters and speaking in general. So in doing that, and I'll wrap this up in 1 sec, I've talked to people right after meetings, and I've even gone as far as sending page or page and a half long emails after a meeting or after a contest to the speaker to say, here are all the things that I heard, here are the things that I think you can improve upon, and here are resources that you can find to start to improve upon those. So that way I can give that harsher, I can give that that feedback that you may feel is appropriate to give to someone, but that you'd want to give to them behind closed doors or something where it's offline and not in front of an entire group.
I think that's valuable, very valuable input, because, like I say, a lot of beginners realize that they feel that they're handicapped, not having years of experience. Knowing that you're coming in with life experience does help. Knowing to take that time after their 3 minutes of Lime Life and actually talking to people and actually getting their views and points across, I see is very beneficial to a speaker. So I love those points. Now, we've talked about a couple different evaluations. Now, in Toastmasters, we have a couple different evaluation roles. We evaluate a speaker, we evaluate a meeting, we evaluate evaluators at some point.
Not enough, I might add.
Does the evaluation process, well, that's a question. Let me ask. Should we actually have, I know it's the general or the master evaluator, depending on what club you're in. Should we have an evaluator for the evaluator that strictly focuses on critiquing the evaluators?
It would be nice. I don't think it's realistic based on the constraints of a Toastmaster meeting, because we're already trying to get through a lot, and especially for a corporate meeting, if you're only doing an hour meeting, clubs have the flexibility to pick and choose what roles will be filled during that meeting. Sometimes you may not have speakers, so you do all table topics. Sometimes you may not have a general evaluator, so that role isn't filled. But again, that's on a club-by-club basis. So I could easily see certain clubs saying, hey, we've only got 10 people that showed up today. There's no reason to evaluate the evaluators because people are already wearing multiple hats during the meeting.
Right.
I do think that goes back to the general evaluator and their feedback to a group. And I think that's something that a seasoned general evaluator may do, but anyone as general evaluator has that power and, in my opinion, responsibility to actually give feedback on all the different roles. For example, there's other things we're evaluating in the meeting. We're evaluating timing. We're evaluating grammar. We're evaluating the speakers. We don't evaluate table topics. So that's definitely something that general evaluator can give feedback on. If there was something they were impressed by or that they saw the speaker really go above and beyond that the evaluations didn't pick up, that's an opportunity for the general evaluator. If the timing report, grammar report, etc. can be improved in a tactful and friendly way, the general evaluator can give feedback there. Same goes for evaluations. So to me, the general evaluator is actually a fun role where you literally can give feedback on everything and anything that happened during the meeting, because there's always certain people that feel like they, outside of the grammarian, they're safe from evaluating or being evaluated. Toastmaster is usually safe. All the general evaluator team is usually safe. But again, that's where a good general evaluator can come in and really give that value and feedback to a club.
So let me ask this. I'm going to put you a little on the spot here. If you could write an evaluation manual on the general evaluator, what would be, I'm going to say the top 5. Give me the top 3 things that you would think that, if you would rewrite the Toastmasters manual and said, okay, these are the criteria things that I want you to look at to evaluate a meeting, what would they be? I know I'm putting you on a spot. I didn't give you a chance to really think about this.
So I think there are some administrative things. That's an easy one off the top of my head of, did the meeting start on time? Was the meeting location well publicized? Was it easy to find the room? Some general things that a lot of the sergeant at arms and what their responsibility falls under. Then I think there's the actual core of the meeting. How did the Toastmaster handle the meeting? How did the speeches go? How did the table topics portion go? And how did the evaluations go? And then last but not least, that third area would actually be, how did the general evaluation team do? Timer, grammarian. Actually, I think those are 2 separate roles if you want to get technical. The also counter and then the grammarian. Word of the day. And that way you break apart an entire Toastmaster meeting into sections, so that way each section gets a couple minutes, if maybe a minute and a half to 2 minutes of feedback, and that way it makes it very easy for someone to take that away to say, hey, yep, administrative piece went great. Here's a few tips that I would do next time to make it better. Portion in the middle, love the speeches. We only had 2 today. Maybe we can get a 3rd for next time, and then that way we won't have to do as many table topics. Table topics were great. There was a theme to them. I really liked how those were done. By the way, when we actually were reviewing the grammarian, maybe a nicer or easier way to do that would just say, Dale, your favorite crutch word was ah. If you want to find out how many times you said it, you can come up and talk to me later. Bob, your favorite crutch word was Again, we can talk offline if you want to find out. And last but not least, timing. Timer, I love the way that you engaged everyone and you brought a little bit of everyone's speech back into your timing report.
Okay. Very interesting, because the evaluation process is the evaluation process. So you're still using your evaluation process of bringing out the good, the bad, and trying to find that happy medium, I'm assuming. I'm sure you're not coming up there, because it's really easy to come up and say, yeah, we started on time and, the room's set up, and just blush that right off.
Yep.
And then basically go, okay, it was a great meeting, and we're done. You have to actually stop and give that feedback. Now, can you use your same skills? If I've never been a master evaluator, can I use those same skills that I've had to be at other meetings, or, just being with anybody to be a general evaluator? Or is that a special Toastmaster skill that needs to be learned before you could jump into that role?
It's a little bit of both. I do think for a general evaluator, it does help to have attended some Toastmaster meetings, to have at least done 2 to 3 of the other roles.
Would you have to be an evaluator first?
It helps.
Would you recommend somebody, before you be a general evaluator, to be an evaluator of a speech, which I personally find maybe a little harder than evaluating a meeting? What would be your intake on that?
I'd say you don't need to have evaluated a speech to evaluate a meeting.
Okay.
And I think that it would help having done both, and that it's like my buddy Abe says. He always focuses on always be evaluating. And so when I'm in that mindset, and that's something that I encourage people to really try to embrace, is if you're always in the mindset of evaluating, you have one of the hats of critical thinking on. And critical thinking is important these days, just so that way you can have a grasp on actually what's going on around you. Again, this is a bit of a non sequitur, but we're constantly bombarded with information. I believe this is the information age. Well, if that's the case, critical thinking is more important now than ever, because you really have to take in all of these inputs and figure out which ones resonate with you, and be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. And essentially what it's getting down to is, evaluating is really just taking a bird's eye view of what's going on at that time, and really to grasp and gather, here's some things that resonated well with you, here's some things that didn't resonate well with you, and the golden opportunity where if you can really get to that level is actually recommendations on what to do next time, so that way anything you address isn't just a complaining, it's actually constructive criticism in the sense that, hey, this is what I saw, this is how I think we can improve it, or this is what I saw that I liked, let's keep doing that.
Now, I'm going to follow up with going back to the speaker's role here real quick.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm doing evaluations and I'm looking at things, does that come into play, especially for you, because you do a lot of evaluation? Does that come into the way you write your presentation or your speech?
That's a great acknowledgement, or that's a great pickup. I've learned more about putting a speech together through evaluating, and especially that my buddy Abe, because I'm actually seeing what I like. Now, the ideal is, from a personal perspective, the things that you like, that you see, that you bring in are those good parts of a speech. Whether it may sound really good of people using 3 things in a speech, you don't know why, but you use it. There's actually a technical reason why. A lot of really good speakers will use the rule of 3s. I don't remember the Roman interpretation of it, but there's logic behind it.
Right.
And there's many other things out there that great speakers are doing all the time, whether it's a TED Talk, a Chicago Ideas Week talk, or just someone who gets up at your local PTA meeting. They're all using different devices and speeches. And actually, thinking a bit more with politics right now, you have, I won't get too much into this, but you have so many different styles out there where you've got a polished speaker like Obama versus a Bernie Sanders versus a Hillary Clinton. And if you even throw Sarah Palin into the mix, each of these people, albeit you may not like their style for one reason or another, they are using certain things called rhetorical tricks to present. So as you're evaluating more, as you learn more, hopefully it sparks an interest in you as well to learn about why, if people use repetitive phrases, that it sticks with you. Or why, if you're asked a question, that you want to answer it or engages you more, or it's evaluation for me has opened up such a wonderful wormhole to dive into that I picked up so much from it. I hope I can get some of that fire and ignition going with other people after they listen to us today.
Well, I've become passionate about evaluation from the writing aspect, because I'm working always on improving writing. And I've talked to a lot of people who always stress that you become the best speakers by great evaluators.
Mm-hmm.
But then I look for great evaluators and I find out that they're great speakers because of their evaluation process. And it's just something that the two go hand in hand together, and we don't think about it a lot of times, especially in the beginning, because we're all worried about getting in front of that group and actually talking to them, where you're back here going, I'll sit back here and do the evaluation, until you realize you have to stand in front.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. You've given out a lot to think about here today. Now, I want to jump into, what would you recommend if I want to become a good evaluator? So I'm coming to you and going, Matt, tell Dale how to become a good evaluator. Forget that I've ever been in Toastmasters. Forget my whole history.
Okay.
What would you tell people, if I want to become a great evaluator, what do I need to do?
Listen. Listening to me is the critical skill to becoming a great evaluator. And it's really taking a step back in a over-connected world of we have our phones, we have music on, we always have something going on, but it's like that line from Depeche Mode, "Enjoy the silence," where if you actually sit there and you take a second to find out all the different inputs that are coming in from you across the board, you're automatically going to become a better evaluator, in my opinion, because then the more you listen, the more you're actually hearing and seeing what's going on around you. The more you can start to pick up small body gestures that people are doing, the more you can key into what the main message of a speech may be. The more you can actually pick up on the different devices that someone may be using in their speech. And then once you start to hear those or see those, you can actually start to track it.
So you're talking about using all your senses, not just your ears. You're actually talking about using your eyes visually and everything you have.
Yeah, I mean, speech and communication is very much a personal, intimate, vulnerable act. So, obviously, you can put and hide behind walls, and there's the whole psychological aspect of it. But really, at the end of the day, when you really listen to someone else, when you're really keyed into their message, to what's going on at that moment, you can start to pick up a lot. You may feel or hear that for some reason the speech just doesn't resonate with you, or it doesn't sound right. You may not know why offhand, but you can give that feedback back to the speaker. And what I find a lot of the time when something really doesn't resonate or it doesn't speak to me at all, it's usually because someone wrote that speech at the last minute or they didn't practice it.
Now, how can I state this? Mm-hmm. Do you, when you listen, is there a mode that you're, how would you tell somebody, how would you teach somebody to listen?
It's tricky because we think we're listening. And what we're doing right now is a great example. I've actually got a Ignite presentation that I did on different styles of communication. I think it was in February from a couple years ago. But essentially what you're trying to do is block out as many other distractions as you can. Now, an example of a distraction that you can block out versus one that you can't block out, your phone. Well, you can put your phone, you can turn the ringer off completely so it doesn't vibrate, it doesn't make noise, and put it face down so that way you don't know if someone's trying to get in touch with you. Something you can't block out is if there's crowd noise, or if, let's say you're in a comedy club and you're listening to someone, there's going to be servers coming around, other people are having conversations. There might be a lot of background noise there, but most Toastmaster meetings, they're generally quiet environments where you can just sit with a piece of paper, the person speaking, and actually write down the different things that you're hearing and that you're listening to. Different ways, again, that you can practice. Actually, an easy one is built into a Toastmaster meeting. It's the Sogermarian. Once you start to attune your ear to how many times someone is saying or so, etc., you actually can pick out the other good things they're saying at the same time. And then you can start to key into, what's the basic building blocks of a speech? Did they have an opening? Did they have a middle? And did they have a close? Your traditional Toastmaster speech should have all those things. So that's another real easy way just to listen for that. You don't have to figure out anything beyond just did they have those three elements.
Right.
And there's other real interesting ways that you can practice listening. Now, in the really far out there way, let's say you've got a really great pair of speakers or a really awesome pair of headphones. If you put on a piece of music that you've heard 1,000 times and you know the sounds in and out, and as much as I don't like to admit, I did have my fair share of listening to Dave Matthews back in the day. And there's this one song, Satellite, where I love the song, listen to it a lot on the radio, listen to it on all sorts of crappy speakers, if you will. They did the job, but once I put on a great pair of headphones, it was a completely different world. I could hear the horns. I could hear all the different instruments in the band. And it provides a completely different experience. It was almost like I had heard them for the first time. And that to me, but go ahead.
I want to jump out because what you're pulling out, you briefly touched on it as the grammarian. I think every Toastmaster will tell you we cannot listen to any award ceremony, any president talk without listening for the ums, the uhs, the fillers, and we sit there and we shake our heads going, don't they hear that?
Uh-huh.
And I think what you're just bringing up right now is having a bad set of listening device. You didn't hear the quality of the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you hit something there. It's really the focus of learning to focus out and tune yourself out and get that message. And then look at the basics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that just occurred to me to add on to that, whether you live in the city, the suburbs, regardless of where you live, there's an opportunity to practice being quiet and picking up all the sounds around you. So that way, for example, I live on the north side of Chicago. There's trucks that go by. There's people that go by. Dogs. I have a sidewalk right outside my window. So if I turn off music, the phone, everything, and just sit and listen, I can really practice picking up all the different sounds around me. Whether again it's someone walking upstairs or it's a heater turning on. You're training your ears to pick up all those different things. Now that's a bit overboard for what you'd have to do in a typical Toastmaster meeting. But in my opinion, it makes me a better evaluator. It pushes me so that way when I am in a contest situation and I've got a room full of people around me and a speaker up there, that I can try to tune out what's going on around me and just focus on that speaker. Or as I've gotten better over time, I can tune into both what the speaker is doing and the audience's response. So that way I can try to pull everything together in an evaluation.
You might think that's a little going overboard, but if we're spending an hour or 2 hours a week, 4 hours a month, going to Toastmasters to preparing how to speak, preparing how to listen, I could see is a much more critical tool to have in a personal life, just dealing with the spouse, the children, the family, the boss, being a critical message to have. So that little exercise you said may feel a little strange, but I think if there were a lot of people just taking that moment to improve their listening skills, I think the world would change dramatically.
I agree.
But I mean, you've hit on some key points here, from how it helps an evaluator, how it helps a speaker. You've given us a lot of information. Now, I know you don't have books to sell. You don't have videos to sell. You're not traveling around the world, doing Toastmaster speaking. If people would like to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of Matthew Fox? And if they want to follow up with evaluation techniques, or maybe invite you to a club, or maybe somebody's got a whole pocket full of money that says, here, Matt, here you go. We want you to speak at an event. How do people get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is one of the easiest ways right now. And if you just go on LinkedIn and search for Matthew Fox, I should be one of the first results that pop up. I've actually got, I forget the exact URL, but I think it's LinkedIn/in/Matthew Fox.
I'll put it, it'll be down on your screen. Otherwise, whenever I want Matthew, I just go Matthew Fox, Toastmaster Genius, and he pops up. So it's easy that way.
You're too kind.
Well, no, Matthew was nice enough. I have to say this. Matthew was actually nice enough to come out to the Orland Park Toastmasters and be a guest evaluator, and actually evaluated an individual who was on their fifth speech, so they were somewhat a newbie in the industry. And he then took the time out to actually spend an additional 15 minutes after the presentation, after the whole meeting, to give a one-on-one. So our club was actually able to see how the inner workings of actually sitting down and talking to somebody and evaluating and asking them feedback and ideas on why they did this and how they did that and how it felt. And for somebody who's done evaluation and has been evaluated many times throughout his career for different things, it was very joyful to watch the interaction, the kindness, the communication that actually occurred, and the abilities and the skills that were brought up, because I saw that speaker speak 2 weeks later, and he improved. And I know some of it was from Matthew's coaching, and that was part of your coaching style that you do. So, as I say, thank you for our club for coming out, but he is a great speaker. Matthew, you are a great evaluator. The insights that you're telling people work. And that's why I'm so happy that you decided to be interviewed here today, and I thank you for doing that. So if you do get a chance, reach out to Matthew, make a connection with him. He is a very good evaluator. If you're in the Chicagoland area, I'm sure, you could, bend his arm a little. He'll come out to your club and do evaluation, or come out to see the district events. You're always around. You're not a hard guy to get a hold of, which is a great thing. So with that being said, I want to thank you, Matthew, for giving us this great insight.
My pleasure.
And my name is Dale Obrochta. I'm part of the Orland Park Toastmasters. Feel free to share this video and spread the good word about evaluation. So enjoy the day. Thank you much.